Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Rebecca. I'm an animal communicator and spiritual medium. If you have just watched my first video on Laika, the dog that was sent into space by the Soviet Union in 1957, this is my part two. I decided to start recording again because the first video is very long. There's a lot of information to take in. If you haven't watched that already, Channeling with Laika, I would recommend that you do before we move on to this next part, as there's quite a lot of background information in there that will help you to put these two things together. As I said at the start of my other video, I will give a disclaimer, a trigger warning, because many of you I know are here because you love animals just as much as I do, and this is a sensitive subject, talking about the mistreatment of animals in relation to research and spaceflight. So you may find, if you're very sensitive, you may not want to watch this video, which is absolutely fine. Or you may just want to watch it perhaps broken down into easier to digest segments. As I said in my last video, I have kind of tried to be very careful about how I describe things. So there's nothing super gory or horrible. It's just, it is distressing. It was distressing for me to channel, to find out and research about. But also, you know, it's just distressing to hear it anyway. So channeling Laika in my previous video, Laika was a street dog from Moscow who was taken on by the Soviets to be the first living creature who went into orbit in space. And I've discussed at length in my last video about all of the things that occurred with Laika and how it was, so much of it was so unnecessary, and she was really treated quite badly. While working with Laika, she brought through two other animals. Now, there have been many animals that have gone into space. I said in my previous video, there are many other animals that other countries have sent into space. It still goes on today. So naively, I thought that it didn't, but it does still go on today. And you can hear more about that in my first video. Information is also available online for you to research yourself. So this next animal I'm going to speak to you about, who stepped forward to lovingly share their energy with me and to give me an insight into their experience with experimentation for space research purposes, was a chimp called Ham. And in 1961, he was sent by the Americans into orbit. And again, it's just an incredibly sad start to life. He was born in 1957 in French Cameroon, and he was caught by trappers at the age of 2 in the wild, and he was sold to the Rare Bird Farm in Miami. The US Air Force then bought him and 39 other chimps to prepare for the mission in New Mexico. And straight off the bat, I just felt really sad. It was like, here we go again. Like in my last video, Laika was a street dog who was actually incredibly happy as a street dog, and she was effectively snatched off the streets for this experiment. He was a baby. She was actually thought to only be around 2 years old as well, and he was a baby, age 2, and then he was sold on. And all of these other chimps that were sold to for experimentation research purposes, for what I've described in my last video as just power, greed, just absolute madness during the time of like the great space race, and all of that was still kind of going on. The energy of that, of being the first for this, the first for that, the power and greed went to people's heads, and it's unforgivable. It's absolutely unforgivable. I said in my last video, the only way I can describe the people that did these things were psychopaths, because you read some of the things that they said about you know, like for instance, with these chimps, Ham, the chimp, who is the beautiful animal that I am channeling with today, he had a handler called Edward Dittmer. I don't know, I didn't research, I don't know whether Edward is still alive. but it's completely psychopathic. You know, when you read up, he talks about how calm and lovely Ham was to handle, and said, oh, he performed so well, he was a remarkably easy chimp to handle. I would hold him just like he was a little kid. And that for me just blew my mind, because I'm like, so you're likening him to being a child, yet you're treating them absolutely horrifically. And then it begs the question, was that how you would treat a child? You're comparing him to a child and you're thinking that the way you're treating him is okay. So, you know, do you think that's acceptable behaviour to children? Or have you made that, you know, that comparison? Well, I wouldn't treat a child like that, but this is an animal. I cannot, and I said this in my last video, I just cannot get into the mindset of these people. It is so far removed from who I am. I just cannot understand it. I really cannot. And it just, reading about it just throws up more questions for me than it does answers. There's this technique, and I hate the flowery language that's used, because I think this is very dangerous. In humanity, wording is often used. Now, you know, that's why it's called spelling, because words are spells and words hold lots of energetic power. We dress it up in a lot of flowery language. And so by calling things like conditioning or a technique, it doesn't sound terrifying and horrible and torturous. It sounds just run of the mill and just normal, doesn't it? So they have this technique called avoidance conditioning. And basically what that meant was they would strap Ham into a chair, and if he failed to pull a lever within 5 seconds of seeing a flashing blue light, they gave him electric shocks to the soles of his feet. Can you imagine? Like, this whole time connecting with Ham, he was a baby, and I kept seeing like a baby in a high chair having the same thing done to them. Now, most humans would think that was absolutely terrible. Don't get me wrong, there are some absolute not right people in the world that would think that that was also fine to do to children or to other humans. But the majority of us who are kind, compassionate, loving, and have empathy would think that was absolutely terrible, terrifying, and painful to do. But this is what they did to him. So they strapped him into a chair. So again, he couldn't consent. He couldn't leave when he didn't like it, and he didn't like it. It was scary and it hurt, is what he said. And in order to make him pull the lever when they wanted, they would administer these electric shocks to him. So straight off the bat, this is just disgusting. It's torture. And I don't, whatever people say about, oh, but you know, these techniques, they try to justify them. There is no justification. It's absolute madness. It reminded me very much when I started researching. And if you haven't watched my first video, I highly recommend you do, because I was speaking about how it came about that I ended up channeling Laika, who has now brought through Ham and the other animal that I will speak to you about later. They want this to be known. They want it to be known about how, you know, how they are being treated. And it was very difficult for me. It was something I had avoided, not because I'm naive and I'm unaware it goes on. I'm very aware of the fact it goes on, and it disturbs me deeply, which is why I have not dealt with it before and not addressed it, because I knew that I would find it very hard not to become emotionally invested and to be upset and to be angry. But what Laika had said to me was, it was righteous anger, and she wanted me to feel those things, to show my humanity, to show other humans, to reach other humans, so that you would too look into, understand and feel compassion, empathy for what they felt, and to know that we have to put a stop to this collectively. So this avoidance conditioning reminded me very much of the Milgram experiment. When I studied psychology, it was one of the things that I had studied, where they placed people in a room. They had several participants, and they placed people in a room with someone in a lab coat, so immediately people would think they were of an official capacity. And this is why I have a real problem with some of the things that happened previously over the last few years. People just trusting experts. We don't know who they are. What are they experts in? How did they become experts? A lot of these people are self-labeled. But in the Milgram experiment, they put people in lab coats standing beside a table where a participant would sit, and they had a machine that they were told would administer electric shocks to a person in the other room that they could not see. And they wanted to see basically how people could be conditioned, how obedient people could be, and, you know, if people had limits to what they would do to another human. And so they would say to them, okay, increase the voltage, press the button. And when they did it, they would hear someone in the other room, and it wasn't really happening, but they thought it was because that's what they'd been told. Someone in the other room would respond to the shock they were receiving. And reading that experiment is shocking. The number of people, there were people that did say they were uncomfortable with it, because what they did was the expert would keep saying, turn the dial up higher, administer a higher electric shock. And the screams from the other room, from the person that they perceived were being given the shock, would become louder, more excruciating, unbearable to hear. And they wanted to see how obedient people would be if an expert stood beside you and said, keep pressing the button. And so many people still did it, despite the fact knowing that there was another human on the other side of that wall that they truly believed they were administering an electric shock to. They still did it. They still pressed the button because the expert told them to. And that says a lot about how far humanity has fallen. And that was a long time ago that experiment happened. But this, what Ham was telling me, and the research I did about this administering electric shocks to him if he didn't do what they wanted within a specified time, reminded me very much of that experiment. And it's just as horrific to remind myself and to tell you about it today as it was when I very first learnt about it. Like, why would people do that? Like, it's that ability to care about our own lives and to think about, I'm a human being, I don't want pain, I wouldn't want that done to me, to then switch off completely and to other this beautiful animal or to other another human. And we do it a lot. And where that comes from, I don't know. I think, like in the case of the Milgram experiment, there was a part of a perhaps a little bit of self-preservation, but also morally, you know, people are all different, and they always say that everyone has a price. And sadly, I do think that perhaps that's true in some cases. I know without a doubt, 100%. You could never pay me. You could never, you know, promise me the most amazing life, pay me the most money in the world. I would never do that to another human or another animal. I wouldn't. I really don't understand where that comes from, the whole othering, you know, viewing people or animals as less than. And this is what this situation was. The people that were doing it absolutely did not care at all. So on January the 31st, 1961, he was strapped into a chair with sensors fitted all over him to monitor him performing tasks. The vessel that he went on, or the ship, was called Mercury Redstone 2. It launched into a suborbital flight. And this is horrific. It launched into a suborbital flight at 5,857 miles per hour. 5,857 miles per hour, 157 miles above the Earth. That's not what they planned. They planned that it wouldn't go that fast and it wouldn't go that high. But because, and you will hear this in my video with Laika, because of this greed and ego and this need to be the first for everything, all these countries were just ridiculous. They were rushing things. They weren't testing things properly. And basically what happened in Ham's case, Mercury Redstone 2, the speed was actually 1,400 miles per hour faster than they had originally planned for and tested for, and 42 miles higher than they had originally planned for due to air pressure loss because of a crack in the vessel. So it wasn't safety checked, it was rushed, and because of that, I'll just read that to you again. The flight happened at 5,857 miles per hour and 157 miles above the Earth. Can you even imagine? I've seen, and it makes me nauseous to watch it, I've seen videos of pilots where they are testing and they go through, you know, to the extreme G-force and how they pass out and they feel awful and you see their faces going. To me, that's not normal. That's not normal behaviour for a human body. We were not designed to do that. Why we do it, again, is because we like to push ourselves and, you know, power, greed, money, all of those things, the things that, you know, material things that have a negative effect on the things that we do to ourselves. It's not natural. Imagine, I mean, I think still that the speed that they wanted him to go at anyway was ridiculous and dangerous, but imagine that kind of speed, the impact on your body. And also, you have to remember, he was a chimpanzee. He wasn't a person that they would have said, okay, so this is going to happen. This is what we expect the, you know, the speed to be. You can expect to feel this way. There was no discussion. There was nothing, because he was an animal and they didn't communicate with him. And in my other video, when I was talking about Laika, all she kept saying was object, object, object. They were seen as objects. They were nothing. They were handled from person to person, you know, placed in the positions that they needed to be in, assigned the tasks. They were seen as subjects and objects. They were not living beings at that point. The thought of, are they uncomfortable? The thought of, are they happy? None of that came into it because it didn't matter to them. They had this mindset of what they wanted to achieve. They were going to be paid handsomely for it. They wanted the fame that came with being the first for whatever it was. You know, being the fastest, being the highest, going around the earth so many times. All of that came before this beautiful, beautiful creature. And all of the creatures that have been in space and all of the animals that continue to be used for research purposes in space. And I go into more depth about that in my video about Laika, about, you know, how they consider that some animals that they use now are, you know, it's all fine because they're not as important as animals like chimps and dogs. You'll see, like, I'm struggling to get the words out because it's not in my vocabulary. These things of like othering, it's just not in my vocabulary to consider. It's so far out of my understanding of like why people are like this, that this is so difficult. It's a difficult topic for me to cover, but I hope that in doing so, I'm raising awareness and I'm helping you to understand what the animals went through as well from their perspective, not just from, you know, the brilliant achievements that we were told about in the media at the time, or the continued achievements, the way that it's still posted about. If you look on like NASA's website and things like that, the way they talk about it is like how amazing it is and how wonderful it is, and you know how we've made so many advancements because these animals, I can't remember what it said now. It was like these animals gave their lives. No, they didn't. They didn't give their lives. You took them. You took their lives. They didn't give them willingly. They couldn't possibly consent to what you did. You stole them off the streets. And despite the fact that, you know, and like this chimp was already captured by trappers, it was taken somewhere. They didn't give their lives. Let's not make any bones about that. They didn't give their lives. You took them. And that's disgusting. And as I said in my other video, I try to be very balanced whenever I do these videos, and most of the time it's very easy because I can see the wider perspective and I can see why things happen. But in this case, I cannot get my head around what has happened and what continues to happen. It just makes absolutely no sense to me. So I am angry, I am passionate about it, I am upset. And I hope that you will realise that you know, you will feel the reason why I am deeply, deeply invested in telling these stories about these animals. It obviously, with this air pressure loss and the crack that was in the vessel when he went up, they still said, and it was almost like this was an achievement, which I also found hard, his performance was only slightly slower than it was on Earth. Well, of course it was, because they were still shocking him if he wasn't performing. So not only was he dealing with the pain of the shocks and also not knowing what the hell that was, just that it hurt, he was also dealing with this mad feeling of like pressure on himself and speed and being in a strange environment. He was dealing with all of those things, and it was so much. And as I said about Laika, she had this lovely gentle energy. He's just got such a gentle energy. Like, you just feel like I can feel like as if he was a person. It would be like having this just a beautiful hug with like a grandparent, and just that feeling of love and safety. He had this lovely energy of making those around him, the other chimps, he was like the comforter in the group, is what he's saying. And Laika had that lovely energy, and when she brought Ham through with her, I can see why, because they came through to help me on what they knew would be a very difficult subject for me as a human. And I think I said previously with Laika, like, that's so beautiful, and it's a testament to animals of how compassionate they are and how they do give unconditional love despite what humans have done. Even though we're recounting the awful things that happened to them, Ham is still here, gently waiting and helping me along, because he knows it's difficult for me. And yes, it's difficult for me, but it's nowhere near as difficult as it was for him when he experienced it firsthand. So for that, I feel truly humbled, because how selfless to still care. Not only how another feels, but how a human feels when it was humans that did all of this unnecessary suffering to them. So because of this crack and the problem with the air pressure, he didn't land where they had planned that he would land. Now, I think from reading it, again, there's a lot of information that's kind of here, there and everywhere, and that is due to, at the time, a lot of cover-ups went on, a lot of things weren't released, a lot of things were tweaked to make things sound better than they were. And it sounds to me like he was always destined to land in the Atlantic Ocean, because they had the USS Donner vessel waiting to collect him. So it sounds like it was always planned that he would land in the ocean. However, because of this crack and the air pressure loss and the speed and all of those things that happened that they hadn't planned for, he landed over 100 miles away from the spot that he was supposed to be at, which then meant that it took the ship hours to reroute to get to the new landing spot to collect him. And this part is possibly, all of it's horrific, but this part for me was possibly the most horrific, because it took them hours to reroute to go and pick him up. Water came in through that crack and reached dangerous levels before they got to him. And at this point, he told me and he showed me, it was almost like he allowed me to be in his body for that brief moment, immersed in what he experienced. He was shrieking, he was shaking his head from side to side, so distressed, and he couldn't escape, and his head hurt. He had so much pressure in his head. And Laika had shown me this too, that she had a lot of pressure in her head, because again, it's not normal, it's not a natural environment for any living being to be in. And just that, I can feel it now, that level of distress, it's giving me like heart palpitations. And he was shrieking, shaking his head violently from side to side, because what we have to remember is, in all of these cases, the animals were restrained. They were restrained. So again, doesn't matter what you say, they were trained to be put in these situations. You know, like if you train a dog to sit and wait, and then it will go when you let it go. It can break that at any moment. And I know that with my own dog. if she doesn't feel like complying, she won't sit and wait to eat her treat. She'll get up and grab it if she wants it. But these animals were physically restrained, so even if they had a change of heart, even if they were scared, they could not move. And that is what he was showing me, that distress, the overwhelming distress. When he showed me, when I was originally channeling, when he showed me this and allowed me to feel it, I honestly thought, in myself now, I honestly thought I was going to have a heart attack. The palpitations, the fear, the anxiety, it was so much for my human body to take. I can only imagine, even though he's let me experience it. And obviously I didn't experience it in full because I probably would have died from the stress. How terrifying and traumatizing that was to him. Now, there's a lady called Jane Goodall, and it was only in my research that I remembered her. She was actually a lady that I'd followed when I was younger, so I might look back into some of the work that she's done, because she is a very well-known primatologist, and she had seen how afraid he was. Now, there's a photo, and before I read about Jane Goodall and what she had said, I could already feel the energy of this photo. So I'll share the photo for you to see and for you to come to your own conclusions. But there's a photo of one of the crew members of the USS Donner, who, after his rescue, Ham is sitting in the chair, and in the photo, this crew member is holding his hand, and in the picture he looks like he's smiling, but instantly I knew he wasn't, because if you look at his eyes, you can see just pure fear in his eyes. That photo was put out almost like, look how happy he was to be rescued, what a touching moment between the rescuer and Ham. That photo is an absolute lie. It's not what it is at all. Sorry, that's my smoke alarm system tests itself every week. That photo is a complete lie, because you just have to look at his eyes and you can see the fear in his eyes. And what I also noticed was, and if you see this picture, you tell me in the comments if you noticed the same. This crew member isn't actually holding hands. Like, you've seen some animals rescued, especially with chimps and apes. They've wrapped their arms around the rescuer. There are some very real human moments where that has occurred. However, the thing I noticed in this photo is Ham isn't holding this man's hand. The man is holding him. The man is holding his hand up, raised up, and I could feel in that moment that this wasn't a lovely moment. This was a quick get a picture that this can go out. And I'm sure it probably went out in the papers. I didn't look, but I'm sure it probably went out in the papers that, the chimp from space was rescued. What a touching moment. I actually don't think, that it was at all. This photo, I do really feel, was actually, it was staged. It was staged to look like a tender moment in this rescue. And it absolutely wasn't that at all. And Jane Goodall, the primatologist I mentioned earlier, had said she noticed how afraid he was. He definitely wasn't smiling like the photo depicts. She had seen that many times in chimps that were terrified. At this point during this session, Laika and Ham, both in unison, said to me, "Villains are posing as heroes and people are willingly too blind to see. If you allowed yourselves to feel, it would reveal all." And that message hit me deeply, because it's part of what's wrong with humanity right now. We are so intent on filling our lives with things to fill up every spare space and moment in our lives, to avoid looking at things that make us uncomfortable, not only in the wider world, but uncomfortable about ourselves. And because we've lost touch with ourselves so much, we have deeply lost touch with everything else. And this just shows in these experiments that people were viewing these animals as objects and nothing more than something to assist in their experiment to get the results that they wanted. So we really have to look, it's a lesson to look more deeply at ourselves and to look at where we are avoiding seeing the truth. And I think for many of us as well, especially over the last few years, I think many of us have woken up to things that we once believed were true that we now realise were either complete lies or were somewhere between a lie and a truth. And that's why discernment is so important. It's really important for us to question everything, to not just take on board what we're seeing or hearing. I always say we can never truly know unless we experience the moment ourselves, and I still stand by that. You know, everything else is just what we're told. It's programming, it's the experience of others, and you know, none of us experience the world in the same way. But we really are invited by Laika and by Ham to look more deeply at where we are avoiding feeling rather than just relying on our five senses. Something interesting that I read in my research was that Ham absolutely refused to get back in the chair. They wanted to do more photos with him after they got him out and checked that he was okay. But he said no. He knew they're evil once. Never again was he going to get back in that chair. And even though that's incredibly sad, it did make me smile and it made me happy, because it was his, in a situation that he was so controlled by humans, like being restrained in the chair. That was his one way of being able to do what he wanted, his one act of defiance, where he took back a little of his power, and that made me happy. As I'd said in my channeling with Laika, the more research I did and the more I read, and I don't know why, but I just kept thinking like, oh, I hope there's a happy outcome. I hope things get better. It didn't. It got worse and worse the more I read it. And Ham's story was exactly the same. It just got worse and worse. So after he went through that horrific ordeal and he had to be, you know, treated and checked over, and all of the stress on not just his physical body, but on his emotions, his mind, his, you know, even spiritually, at a deep spiritual level, everything that happened to him was just so traumatic and so unnecessary. In 1963, they sold him to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. And it gets worse. They kept him in solitary confinement for 17 years. This poor baby, he was a baby when all of this awful stuff happened to him. And remember, right back at the start, I said he was caught by trappers and sold. He never chose this. He didn't willingly go into this life with humans. He was taken from a life that he knew, his natural life. And this just broke my heart after everything he went through with that horrific, unnecessary flight that should never have happened, with greedy, egotistical people, psychopaths, maniacs is what they were. He was then kept in solitary confinement for 17 years. And we already know from extensive research done on people, you know, even in prisons, people that are in solitary confinement, it has an effect on you. It does have an effect on you. And people, many people like myself included, I'd be quite happy to live out in nature without lots of humans around me. We still need that human connection because that is in our nature. We are living beings, we are sociable beings. You know, but we have, in those instances, say if we choose to live far away from others, we have the choice. We still have the choice to make a trip back into society to see other people. He had no choice. Yet again, he had no choice. He was put in a situation that he didn't consent to, that he didn't want. 17 years. Think about all of the things that he would have missed during that time. He didn't get to be part of a group. He didn't get to learn from the elder chimps. He didn't get to witness the playfulness of more babies being born. He didn't get to explore his own playfulness as a baby chimp. He didn't get to interact with his own kind. He didn't get to roam freely and to climb trees and to experience the habitat that he should have in his natural setting. He was stuck in solitary confinement in a zoo where, again, He was an exhibit, making money for people that showed him off like some kind of prize with no thought for it. And I've said in previous videos how as a child I did go to the zoo and I loved it. I deeply loved animals, and to me it was such an amazing thing to see these, you know, animals that we don't have in the UK, exotic animals that I would get to see close up. And I just remember being just amazed and in wonder and loving these animals so deeply without the horror. As a child, the naivety was a blessing, because as an adult I realized that these places are not there. You know, there are some places, and I still feel that there's a lot of work to be done. There are some places that do have, you know, they have breeding programs and they're trying to stop animals from going extinct. But again, we have to look at, is that moral? Is it ethical? On a spiritual level, is it perhaps time for that species to go extinct? Is there a wider understanding that we need to look into? But many animals that are living in zoos, and you know, if you've seen my video on the animals that were left behind at Marineland, France, it was very ironic to me that people are outraged now that the park has closed and these animals are, you know, kind of in limbo while they're waiting to be rehomed. But these same people were the ones paying admission fees and happy to go and watch them perform for entertainment. Why weren't they outraged when the park was open? And so for me, this is just deeply, it's like a kick in the face for Ham. He'd already been through trauma and abuse, put in a situation to go to space which he didn't consent to, and now he was deprived of the one thing that he would have so needed as a young chimp, and that was care, community, education from others of his own kind. So he was in solitary confinement for 17 years in a zoo for humans to just go and look at. And I have no doubt, I didn't look this up, but I have absolutely no doubt they would have capitalized on the fact that he was a chimp from space. That would have been used to promote, you know, promote higher admissions to the zoo. They would have used it, because humans are terrible like that. They want to jump on anything that's going to cause a bit of sensationalism, get more views. You know, we see it now with like clickbait headlines on YouTube just to get views and likes and shares. So I have no doubt that they would have used that for people just to come and to look at him and to be amazed that he went to space. And, you know, he looks fine. Look at him. He went to space and he came back and he's fine. But what they didn't realise was all of the damage that was done to him mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. All of those things they didn't see because they chose not to see it. And that's the truth about a lot of the cruelty in our world. People are aware of it, but because it's incredibly uncomfortable, and as I said in part 1, my channeling with Laika, and here, it's incredibly uncomfortable. I found this, and I'm still finding it, reading back through these notes, sharing this with you. It's incredibly uncomfortable. But discomfort for a brief period of time for us to raise awareness is nothing compared to the permanent suffering and discomfort that animals or people are experiencing, sometimes on a daily basis. So after 17 years, he went to the North Carolina Zoo to live with other chimps, and he showed me that he found it difficult. He did find it difficult because he'd spent all those years on his own. He found it hard to integrate. He didn't really know. He's saying, I didn't know what being a chimp was. At that point, he was so crushed. He didn't really know who he was. He was just existing. And I think that's incredibly sad. But he was showing me that they were very gentle. They were actually very gentle with him. There was some conflict. He was showing me there was a little conflict, but he says that's normal in our world. You know, as animals are working out kind of their hierarchy and their place within the group. There was a little conflict, but he says that there were chimps that were incredibly gentle with him, and he was showing me, I was hearing the word matriarch, he was showing me a bigger female chimp who was very loving and kind and very mothering towards him, and he felt safe around her, and he actually felt he felt joy being with them, and he said it was a feeling of coming home, which is really sad because he only got to be with them for 3 years and then he died. And he says it was bittersweet, you know, this is the life he should have always had, not in a zoo obviously, but with other chimps and living a natural life. And he says, you know, he wants him and the other animals, just as Laika had said, to raise awareness, to think more compassionately and kindly about animals and to treat them with respect. So he died on January the 19th, 1983 at the age of 25, which I understand for a chimp is actually quite young. So when you think about how long he lived, 25 years, and only 3 years of that was with his own kind, not being looked at by humans, not being exhibited, not being experimented on, not being shocked, not being strapped into a chair, hurtling through space. None of those things were his choice. And he got 3 years with his own kind. And you have to think that not all of those 3 years were him fitting in. He had to settle in, he had to heal, he had to learn, he had to understand and grow. It was a whole new way of life for him. Yet again, he was starting over again. Nothing about Ham's life was easy. And one of the things that I touched on briefly in my video with Laika was about the naming of these animals that have been used for science experiments. He was originally called Chimp, I think he was Chimp 56, because if the flight didn't go well and he didn't survive, they didn't want the public to be upset because they would have been attached to him had they named him. I think any decent human with any level of compassion and care for animals would have been deeply upset whether he had a name, no name, Chimp 56, he was called Dave. They wouldn't have cared because they cared deeply about another living being. So the fact that they even thought, well, if we name him, people are going to get attached, just shows you that they literally have no empathy. They were not even in touch with emotion at that point. That was their reasoning. They didn't understand. And the name Ham was given to him. It's an abbreviation of the base where this flight and everything happened. It's just, and he's sat with me now. His energy is sat with me, and he's got his hand is wrapped around my thumb. I can feel him just sat beside me, holding my hand. Still that loving energy of, like, you know, guiding me through this, and, you know, wanting to be remembered, being grateful that I'm telling this story, but also that kindness for me to help me through. So just as a last kick in the teeth for this poor beautiful chimp, they wanted to put his body on display in the Smithsonian. You'd just think, wouldn't you, like, how I can't even, literally the only thing running through this, the theme running through this whole thing is greed and ego. And it's like, look how great we are. Oh, look at the body. This is the chimp that was in space. Oh, look how amazing we are. Still no regard for him, him being a living being. No regard for him having endured the most awful life at the hands of humans, which would have been avoided had he been left alone. Still, it's a great achievement. And at this point, I don't know whether they are I think they are complete psychopaths. Whether they are also deluded and they actually do believe this was an achievement and that they deserve a pat on the back and that this was something great. I honestly, because I said earlier, this is not my mindset. I cannot get into that mindset because it is so far away from the kind of person I am. So they wanted to put his body on display after all of the awful things they did. They just couldn't leave him be. But there was pushback. And as I've said before, there were people, and there are always people in the darkness that shine a light, people that will speak up. And it's important. And more of us need to be those people that will speak up and raise awareness, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. Because you know what? When we're uncomfortable, it forces us to change. And we need to change. Humans are doing so many dreadful things. We need to completely assess the way in which we interact with the world and all other living beings, including other humans. So there was a lot of pushback about how disgusting it was, and I believe there was actually a news article saying like that's the final straw, like you've already done all this stuff, you're not going to put his body on show as well to still make your money and be on show. So it was decided that that wouldn't be done. However, and this still doesn't sit right with me, he says it doesn't matter now. He also says there will be an internment, and I've heard that word before, and I don't know what that means. I need to look that up. Let me just have a quick look, see if I can see what that actually means. Internment, isn't that where they bring the body back or something? I'm not entirely sure. Let me have a look. What is an internment? It's about internment of ashes. The process where cremated remains are placed in a permanent resting place. Okay, so he's saying there will be an internment. So it sounds like, because what it says is, so there was pushback about displaying his whole body, and I find this really odd. So displaying his whole body wasn't okay, but they decided that they'd display his skeleton instead, which makes no sense to me. Like, how can you push back on one thing and all of him, his skeleton, his organs, all of it was his body? How can we say no to putting his body on display, but yes to his skeleton? So his skeleton is now on display at the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Maryland. The rest of his remains were buried at International Space Hall of Fame, New Mexico, where it all began. And that feels so wrong to me. Hall of Fame, as though it's some flipping tourist attraction, like, you know, the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Oh, isn't it amazing? Oh, the whole thing sickens me. It really sickens me. But he's saying there will be an interment. So I feel like there will be, as there is more awareness of the things going on around animals and the way that we mistreat them, there will be less experimentation on animals. Eventually it will be eradicated. Something will happen where his remains will be removed and they will be put in a much better place. I would perhaps suggest that they go back to where he was originally from, take him back home to the land that he was born in, the land that he knew, and so that he can return to the earth, and so that other chimps that live there now can also be around his beautiful energy. But his energy lives on, and you know, it's a very sad, just all of it. As I said, I kept thinking, like, will some of it get better? Is there a happy ending? And when I heard like he'd gone to the zoo and then he's in solitary confinement, it just, all of it's awful. Just there's not really anything that I can say, well, at least there's not any. At least he got 3 years with other chimps when he should have had a whole lifetime with his own group family. I was feeling really, really angry and sad, and I feel like even though you've seen me quite passionate and angry and at times very sad during these 2 videos, it's nothing compared to when I was doing the research and I was sat with their energy. I was sat out in my garden doing it, and I was so full of rage. I had to take a break because I could feel it was just really unhealthy the way I was feeling. And I just felt so angry and sad. And Laika said to me, don't worry, we are all at peace. Our energy together is working to provide healing to others. So their energy is collectively working not only to help animals that have transitioned, that have been through similar things at the hands of humans, also to help those animals that are currently in situations where they are against their will. They're providing healing and understanding, and they're giving them supportive, loving energy during those difficult times, which I do take comfort in, and I think that is very pure and loving. And again, very selfless to know that they went through all of that and now they're revisiting difficult situations in order to help other animals. But you know, they say that's Laika says that's what we're all here for, to help each other, to love one another and to grow. I wanted to see with Ham, I wanted him to show me his energy now. Has he reincarnated? And he shows me that currently, and this will make you feel joyful, which we all need after this harrowing, you know, recounting of his life. He is currently a young chimp living wild with a family. He is experiencing everything he missed, and he was showing me himself throwing something to another young chimp in very tall green grass. I couldn't quite see what it was he was throwing, but the grass was lush and very tall, bright green. And he says, there are many with kind hearts surfacing to make a change, to protect our peace and allow us to grow. Change is coming faster than you think. Those that are aware will wake up others. A movement greater than you know, a tidal wave of love engulfing the planet. Those that cannot and will not see go on again to begin again, meaning to reincarnate. Only then will they understand. We are all held in the arms of Mother Earth. When we unite, it's the most beautiful song. And I thought they were such beautiful words. Beautiful, beautiful words that he shared. And I was being shown this huge park with hundreds of thousands of people and all different species of animals. They were all interacting, observing and sharing the space. And I could just feel like there was unity, equality, respect and so much love among everybody. And it was such a beautiful vision. The sky was blue, there were trees, flowers, lush green grass, a gentle breeze, the sun was shining. It was just a real vision of peace and joy. And all of us coexisting together in harmony, which was just so beautiful. And those times will come, and I don't know when they will come. It could be in my lifetime, it may not be in my lifetime, but those times are coming because, as I said, excuse me, we need change. Change has to come. Yeah, change just absolutely has to come. There's no other way. So yeah, so I can feel Ham's energy. He's just at the side of me, wrapping his arms around me, and he's saying it's all right. It will be all right. So with him, his beautiful energy, and I leave that with him now. There was another animal that came forward during this session, a cat called Felicette. Again, she was a street cat from France. And the French decided, woohoo, we need to send an animal into space so that we can get our little 5 minutes of fame madness. And Felicette was a very, I don't know, her name is spelled Felicette, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing it wrong, if it's Felicity or Felicette. I'm going to call her Felicity. It feels more like that's perhaps what the name is, but apologies if I have said that wrong. So her energy also came forward, but her energy is very much in the background. She wants to be acknowledged, but she doesn't want an in-depth kind of an in-depth sharing of everything at this moment, which I've respected. So I'm only going to share a small amount with her. Of her with you, but it doesn't mean that her story is any less. And it's like there's so many other animals that have been used in this way for research purposes, which I had no idea about, and I would love to go through them all. And there may be some that I do visit and go through if they wish to come forward and share their stories. So in no way am I dismissing the importance of their lives and their stories, but it was particularly these three animals that wanted to be reminded, and Laika has been the catalyst for all of that. So in 1963, Felicette, a street cat from France, was blasted into orbit for 15 minutes. Again, she was chosen, she only weighed 5.5 pounds. She was chosen for being calm and of low weight, and France was desperate to catch up with, you know, the Russians, the Americans. They were all doing it. They were desperate to be part of this sending animals into space thing. Again, it was ego, greed, power, just utter madness. So she didn't, and there's not a lot. She didn't want me to say a lot about her, but you can look online and you can find out more about her. But she was blasted into orbit for 15 minutes. And the worst part about this with her was she survived. She survived. She came back, and many of the animals hadn't survived because the pressure or the impact of coming back into Earth, I guess through the Van Allen belt, had killed them. But she survived, and so I was like, oh my goodness, she survived. Okay, oh well, at least she survived. It was probably really still traumatizing. And she's saying, yes, it was still traumatizing. It was scary. And I could feel, you know how when cats stretch and their claws come out, I could feel almost as if like she was a person clinging on for dear life. Her claws came out and her little paws were like, what is happening? I could feel that energy with her of like, what is happening? And again, it's not natural. It's not a natural environment. It's not natural feeling for animals or humans. So of course they were distressed. And again, you know, they wouldn't have had any space to move. They would have been restrained, strapped down. And you think about 15 minutes. Think if I sat here with you for 15 minutes in silence, it would feel like a lifetime. Imagine those moments where, like, if you've had a bad dream and you felt like you were in it for ages, but you woke up and it was only a few minutes. Imagine that 15 minutes of pure terror, not knowing what on earth was going on, feeling pressure, feeling scared, not being able to move, being restrained. Imagine how long 15 minutes would have felt. And again, it's like I said about Ham. It's not like anyone rationalized with her and said to her, okay, so you're going to be going up into this little pod. You're going to be tied down. It's only going to be 15. Like, nobody could have that conversation with her because nobody was communicating with her. And even so, it wouldn't have been normal to send her. So she couldn't consent. She couldn't say, oh, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound like something I want. She was strapped in with no way of getting out if she didn't like it. Those 15 minutes would have felt like a lifetime to her. And the worst part of it all is when she came back and they were like, woohoo, she survived. Let's get some statistics and look at all the data. Because again, she would have had electrodes all over her. They euthanized her so they could cut her open and study her brain to see what the impact was. They euthanized her. So this whole thing about it's really important to us, you know, to make sure that the animals survive because then it proves that humans can survive. That wasn't what was important to them because she did survive. They had electrodes, they had data, but they wanted more. These absolute psychopaths wanted more. They euthanized a healthy cat just to study her brain. That is just a whole new level of sick. I'm sorry. We get caught up on stories about serial killers and heinous murder and things that happen to humans by other humans. Something I have realised in the work that I do, we are not talking anywhere near enough about the heinous things that humans do to animals. We still don't. We don't talk about it. I can tell you now, if I searched on YouTube for, you know, horrific stories, horrific crime stories, most of it would be humans doing things to other humans. It wouldn't be humans doing things to animals, and there is a lot of it. There are a lot of people that are just, I can only assume they are just missing something that allows them to behave this way. It just blows my mind. And then it just made me mad because I was like, well, clearly you're saying one thing, like it's important that we carry out these tests to make sure that animals can live and survive space. We want them to survive. And then on the other hand, oh yeah, they survived and we cut them open, we killed them and cut them open to study their brains. Like, absolutely not. Make it make sense. So Felicity was again very gentle, and people had said about, you know, the people that worked with her said about how gentle she was and very, very docile and calm and easy to work with. And again, that's part of the reason that they chose her, which is awful because it's like finding the perfect victim, isn't it? That's what it's like. somebody that was compliant and helpless. And remember as well, all of these animals I've spoken about today, Laika, Ham, and Felicity, they were all street animals. So they had a level of, well, sorry, Ham wasn't. Ham was stolen. He was stolen, but when he was taken, he'd been living in captivity. So when he was taken for the second time to be part of this space program, he'd been living in captivity. So again, animals are very good at observing their environments, of working out ways to survive and grow and thrive and to keep themselves out of danger for the most part. So the fact that all of these animals were picked because they were compliant, that would have been one of their survival mechanisms. You know, for the animals like Felicity and for Laika, who were street animals, they would have learned how to kind of navigate humans, how to behave around humans in order to get what they needed to survive. So shelter or food, things like that. So their compliance was, they weren't compliant because they were happy to be compliant. They were compliant because it was part of their survival instincts. They were just trying to get through. And I think we have to remember that. They weren't compliant because they wanted to be. It doesn't matter, you know, when they're like, they were so easy to deal with, you know, like the guy who said about Ham, he used to hold him like a child. You didn't treat him like a child. Like, I can't make sense of it. And I've been speaking to you for ages. This video and my last video are both over an hour. I really hope that you have listened to it all, because it's so important. It's important to get the message out there. And that's part of what is also wrong with society. We have no capacity for listening to anything that is, you know, anything that's a little bit triggering to people. People don't like it. They switch off. They don't want to hear it. These are the things that are important in our world, and I will not stop standing up and being a voice for the animals and sharing whatever they want me to share, because we need to do better. We are the only species on this planet that does not live in harmony with Earth and with each other, and we have a lot to learn. And I will not. Today, I am angry. I am sad. We need to do better. That's all of us. It starts with all of us. And people just have so little attention span now. You know, they'll sit mindlessly scrolling for hours, but anything like this that's important, they don't want to listen to, because, oh, you know, oh, that's a bit upsetting. Oh, it's a bit triggering. Oh, it's really long. It's long because it's full of interesting facts, and facts that you need to know, because you need to know about the terrible treatment of these animals at the hands of humans. Humans that walk among us. Humans that you may trust to look after you one day. Humans that you may entrust your children with. These are the people that are among us, and we need to look at why we continue to other people and to other animals as if they are not as important as us. So I will never stop speaking up and being a voice for the animal kingdom and for Mother Earth, and trying to make a difference, because, as I said, it begins with us. Now, Felicity, as I said, she wanted to remain kind of in the background. Something that they said was, why would we wish to reincarnate to fix the issues of yesterday if we could do so by living in this moment now, with awareness, love and compassion lighting the way? Today is all we have. Let's make it count. And I asked Felicity if she wanted to tell me, you know, about her, more about her story. And there is information out there about her. But she said she wishes to have her privacy now. And she said, as my life was so public and it was not lived to the full, I will rest now and then come again to live out my days in the way that I see fit, meaning she will reincarnate. She says, inclusion without interference, understanding without control, compassion gives way to new birth and new earth. And I think that's a perfect place to end. Let's look into our own hearts. Let's expand them. Let's welcome in change, not just for humans, but for the animal kingdom and Mother Earth, with a view that we do all live in harmony together one day, in love, unity, and respect for one another. I appreciate today's videos have both been long, and I thank you so much for listening. They are difficult stories to recount, but I really hope that you have gained new understanding from the animal's perspective, and it's made you think about sometimes how the things that we're sold as achievements or, you know, the celebrity culture isn't at all what we think it is. There's a much deeper and darker thread running through it, and that can cause harm to people and to animals, and also to ourselves if we are unwittingly a part of it. Please, as I said at the start, I know it seems weird to say, can you please like this video, because there's nothing to like about it, but I want you to like the fact that I'm raising awareness, to like the fact that you have heard these animal stories and that we can go on to share and make a difference. Leaving a thumbs down just means that it doesn't really get pushed out to more people, whereas if you leave a like, more people will see it and more people need to see it. So I ask you, from Laika, Ham, Felicity and my hearts, please like and share, comment and subscribe, and let's make a change in the world together, for us, for the animal kingdom and for Mother Earth. Thank you so much for listening. Love to you all, and I'll speak to you again in another video.